So let's talk about combining flex and grid. So as you know, both flex and grid are very useful to lay out your user interface. There are multiple ways of playing with, different rows, columns, and things like that. Flex and grid are new techniques, maybe not that new, especially flex, but they are compared to classic methodologies. They are fairly new in the CSS world, and they simplify a lot the process of building layouts. Obviously, Flex and Grid have some differences, but they got many similarities to the point that sometimes you'll have to decide which one to use. Yeah, because in many occasions you may be able to build the same user interface either using one or the other. Today, I would like to present you an example, a pretty common example, where we have to deal with both. We have to deal with both, and we'll see why. So I got a very simple app, actually nothing on it apart from the title. So let me present you the problem. I want to build a list of how to say it, a list of a starting grid, yeah, of I don't know, MotoGP. I'm just making that example up. I want to build a list of positions, or when you finish a coding challenge, first, Peter, second, whatever. So I want to display information about the person, the position, the score, if we're talking about the championship, yeah, and I want to present that list of results using a given format. And finally, if I got time, I would like to change the layout depending on the device I'm using, something like that. Once again, the semantics of the example are not the most important thing. It's just the technique, yeah. So imagine that I'm talking about any competition where I want to display the results, first, second, third, and then some scores. So the first thing I would like to do, and I will try to follow strict best practices. So I'm going to create some sort of component to display information about the player. So I'm creating, actually I got the folder already created. I got a player folder. So let me create a new player.javascript file. And also, as you were probably expecting, I'm going to create a player.css file. So now my player.javascript will first of all remember to import React from React. So then we can essentially play with some HTML or JSX code to be a bit more precise. And then export default player or function player. So now we can return a piece of HTML with some details about the player. So following the guidelines we presented you a couple of weeks ago, my component will have a root class name called player, and then inside of it I will display some details. For instance, I will display let me think about that. So div class name, I may not use all these class names, but just in case. So first of all, I got the position of the player. Then I will get the name of the player, and then finally I will like to display the score, yeah, the points, whatever. Yeah, cool. So because I want to build a dynamic player component, I would like to pass these details dynamically because every player will have a different position, different name, and different score. So I'm going to use props, or as you already know, we can destructure props with position, name, score. So then we can simply display position, and then we got the name, and then we got the score. Yep. So that's the first step. Now back to my app.js. Let's import the player component, player, and finally let's display some results. So player position 1, name, and score. Yep, something like that. And then, of course, we can display multiple players in different positions. And then whatever. Yeah. I hope you get the point. 3 players, 3 names, 3 different positions, and 3 different scores. So first of all, let's see what we get. Yeah. So what we get is an error, which is not the best way to start the example, right? But that's fine. Let's try to investigate the problem. So that's a path. I did something wrong with the path. Cannot find file player. I can immediately spot the problem, right? I know because according to my coding conventions, all my files, all my React files should be written using Pascal case. In other words, the first character should be capital. By mistake, here you go, I refer to the file in lowercase. If you have a Mac or a Linux machine, the problem will be immediately spot. I'm not 100% sure if you are using Windows, whether the problem will be reported or not, because Windows, I think, is more flexible when dealing with file names. Yeah? I'm not sure. Anyway, let's try that. Look, so from the data binding point of view, that looks great. You see, I got the first player, I got the second player, and I got the third player. However, obviously the user interface is a bit weird, right? Well, what the hell is that? So for each player, I want to display the position on the left, then the name of the player or the rider or the whatever, and then the score, yeah, alongside in the single row. So how do I do that? Well, let's talk a bit about CSS. So I will leave my CSS open on the right hand side. By the way, guys, this is something I used to do often. If you got a spacing off on your screen, I like to have my JavaScript on the left and my CSS on the right. We'll talk a bit more about how to organize your Windows layouts next week. Next week, I think, guys, we're talking about testing. So when talking about testing, I would like to present you different layouts using VS Code. All right, so first of all, before I forget, on my player.javascript, let's import the CSS. You know, I'm not really paying attention to details. I'm not slowing down because you know that already. I'm not doing anything new so far. Yeah, I'm just reviewing what we know already. So I got the player. So let me add some styles. So for instance, border 1 pixel solid blue. I may change that later on. And then because I want to display all the different elements in the same row, I could use grid, but I find in this particular case flex display flex could be a bit easier under my point of view. So let's see if that made any difference. All right, definitely, that made a difference. Let me zoom that a bit. Yeah, so you see that I got the details one after the other. The syntax looks a bit weird. However, we're going to play around with this. First of all, guys, I need to breathe a bit. I need some space, some padding between my tokens. So, how can I do that? Well, there are different ways to solve the problem. First of all, of course, I can do player position, and then I can do padding 10 pixels. You know, so I can do that. I can definitely do that. Position, name, and score, and that should make the trick. You see, it's okay, sort of okay. There is a different way to do that, guys. Let me show you. We can tell CSS, hey, please apply this padding to all the direct children elements of the player. So I can replace that, pay attention now, with the following syntax. Player, greater symbol, that means please check the immediate children, not the grandchildren, just the direct children, and then asterisk or star. Yeah? That means all the elements that are direct children of the player will have a padding of 10 pixels. Yeah, you see, it's the same result. Yes, that's looking a bit better. I got the position of the player, I got the name of the player, and then I got the score. I'm not very happy about the alignment. I would like guys to display the score maybe on the right hand side. So again, there are different ways we can solve the problem. if you remember when we talk about flex, we could play with a property called flex or flex grow, if you remember that. So my plan is to apply the flex grow property to the name. So I want to keep the position and the score, the smaller the better, fixed width probably, but I want to expand the name as much as possible. So hopefully I can do that. Player and then name, because that's the only property I want to change. And then let's try with flex row first of all. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. You see, by applying flex grow on the name, it's expanding that column as much as possible. You see that the name is in the middle. That may be okay, but I will prefer to put the name on the left-hand side. Yeah. So to do that, I mean, why the name is in the middle? I believe that's because of my app.css. Look, guys, text align center. You know, by default, everything is aligned to the center, but we can easily change that by changing the alignment. Text align left. So now, guys, we got a conflict. Because you have two properties, text align, with different values, center and left, and these two properties apply to the same element. Yeah. So because CSS cascades down, even though we are applying the text align center on the app element, which is a parent component, because this styles cascade down, that means that every child will take them. So now we got a conflict. Let's talk about the specificity. Can you tell me what's the specificity of this selector? 10, that's correct. It's 10 because that's a class. And now, what's the specificity of this selector? 20. So that one should win, right? Because it's more specific. Here you go. You see? So now I got my my layout working better than before. I hope you agree on that. Let's play a bit with colors. I don't really like that color. So let's bring a lighter blue. And then let me add some tricks. So for instance, if I want to highlight the position because of whatever reason, so this just, to make the example a bit nicer, yeah? So player dot position, and then what we got here is, maybe let's change the background color to the same one. And finally, we can change the color to white. Maybe it will look better. Let's have a look. Something like that. You see that unfortunately, the width is not the same. Not sure if I care about that, to be honest. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not going to look after these 3 pixels now, yeah, because I don't care. I think that's good enough. And if you don't like it, you can improve it later on. Cool. So from the player component point of view, I'm happy. I'm going to leave it like that. Yeah. Obviously, I could add more players. Actually, let's add a few more players just to get a sense of how this will look like. So I don't know. Let's just made some players. Maybe 6 players should be enough. Yeah. Something like that. So as you'll see in a minute, I got 6 players. Yeah, fair enough. So from the player point of view, I'm done. However, what I want to build is some sort of grid because there is a lot of empty space. I don't really like. Guys, do you follow any sort of motorsport competition? When they talk about the starting grid? If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me present you. Hopefully I can find a picture somewhere on the internet. Starting grid. See, oh god, sorry, my laptop is very small, very slow. So not sure if you're familiar, guys, with motorsports, but when you start a motorsport race, even if you go karting, it's the same thing. You see, you got the starting grid, which is essentially, generally speaking, 2 free columns, and then the players or the participants on that race, they are displayed something like that in two columns, right? So I would like to build something like that, but instead of building two rows, I would like to build two columns, something like that. You see that picture? So I would like to build something like that. First player, second player, third player, fourth player, and so on, and so on. So how can we do that? Well, in this particular case, I'm going to create a parent component. And the parent component is going to be called starting grid, for instance. Yeah. So my starting grid component will be the responsible to lay out the players, so how do I do that? Well, the same process, right? I'm going to create a new component. So I'm going to refactor my exercise quite a lot now. So my component will be called starting grid. And the starting grid will have a new file called starting grid.js. And obviously I will have to add another file for the styling, starting grid.css. So let's have a look to the JavaScript first. So import React from React. Before I forget, let's import the CSS, starting grid.css, and then export default starting grid. You see, guys, it's pretty much the same thing again, and again. I'm just creating new components and I'm just moving my stuff around. So the app JavaScript will have no idea about the players or the drivers or whatever. So I'm going to remove that from app.js. So it's up to the starting grid component to decide which players, which riders participate on that race. Yeah. So that's the way we can essentially create a hierarchy of components in our application. So from the app point of view, the only thing we care is about the starting grid. Import starting grid from starting grid / starting grid.js. So you see how slick, guys, my app component is at the moment. The only thing it does is to bind with the starting grid. So now the starting grid will be the responsible of displaying the list of players. Yeah. So we can do something like that. Let's create a parent component, and finally let's import player from player, and then now we should be careful, guys. You see, so now player and starting grid, they're in different folders. So do you know how to access the player JavaScript file which is not inside of the starting grid component? How can we bind with it? Brilliant, Adam. That's correct. 2 dots, player / player. But now my question is, okay, that's correct, Adam, that's correct. And hopefully that should work. Let's pay attention. You see, I still got the same result, which is great because I haven't added any functionality, any new feature yet. However, now my question is something you should consider. Is that folder structure appropriate? I'm not convinced. Guys, you should try to avoid having a very flat list of components. Why? Because eventually your application may have hundreds, if not thousands of components. Are you going to list hundreds, if not thousands of folders here? Probably not. Because of that, if the player component only makes sense as part of the starting grid component, then you know what? I'm going to move it inside. I'm going to create a hierarchy of components. So if you drag the player component into the starting grid component, then now you see I'm creating a hierarchy. So that is helping my app to scale in a better way. Because if I want to know the details about a player, this is telling me where the player component is. The player is part of the starting grid component. That's the way I like to structure my app. Also, something I like to do is to keep consistency on the semantics. So if that starting grid is my root component, let's say, then I'm going to rename player to starting grid player. Yeah. So now you see, I can, from a human point of view, I can get a better feeling that that starting grid player component is a child of another component called starting grid. So now I would like to rename all the files and folders. Starting grid player.css and then starting grid player.javascript. So of course now we need to rename few things. So any reference to player will be starting grid player, starting grid player, starting grid player. And now on my CSS, you need to rename few things as well. Starting grid player, not here, yeah, something like that. And with the dot, because we're still referring to it as a class name. You see, VS Code is really good playing with the highlight of the code. Yeah, whenever my code changes colors, I can immediately spot there is something weird. You see, by accident I did something like that. You see, starting with player has a different color here, so visually speaking, I can immediately spot there is something weird, something wrong probably in there. Finally, let's rename the import of the starting grid player. So starting grid player, all the way down. Yeah, starting grid player, starting grid player, starting grid player. If your import gets beyond that vertical line, as usual, guys, remember to break it into a new line for readability purposes. Yeah, something like that should be fine. So let's see if it works. Okay, it doesn't work, but that's fine. All right, why it doesn't work? Because now, can anyone see, guys, why the code doesn't work now? Brilliant. That's correct. Now, because of the starting grid player component belongs to the starting grid, yeah, we don't need the two dots. The naming. What's wrong? Oh, that's correct. I didn't notice that. Ian, you see, by accident, I'm typing player twice. Yeah, so that's not correct. So let's simplify that. I hope, is the CSS correct now? I don't know. Let's just double check that. Starting grid player. That's correct, and the CSS. Yeah, I think that should be correct now. Let's see if it works. Yeah, you see, still works. So, any questions so far? I mean, you see, so far I've done nothing new, right? Actually, in this workshop, I'm not going to do anything you don't really know already. I'm just combining different things, yeah? Semantics, yeah? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, 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 yep. So you had a fragment here instead of a div on the starting grid? Okay, let's go to starting grid player. All right, so you got a fragment on the starting grid player. All right, and you want to add some styles. No, you can't. You can't. You can't. You can. If because of whatever reason you want to do that, personally, I will. I don't know. I will rename my. For sure I wouldn't leave the code like that. If because of whatever reason I really want to have a fragment, I will do something like that. I will make sure that my styles are, my class names are as much specific as possible. Because otherwise, if I got a class name called name and I refer to it on my CSS as dot name, That's extremely dangerous, right? Because if someone else is using a class name named somewhere else, we will infect his or her styles here, right? So don't use generic variable names unless you namespace them by using a root class name like here. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Once again, as far as you namespace it with the name of your component, as you said, that's absolutely fine. Anything else, guys? Could you apply styles using the key? That's a good question. The key. We don't have any key here, Panos. Mm, yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I'm not convinced, but we can try that. Panos, we can try that. Look, let's change our example. So at the moment, I'm hard coding 6 players. Yeah. However, let's do it properly. Let's create an array of players. You've done something similar on conflicts, right? So for each player, you got the you don't even need the position, guys, because if I got an array, the array index will tell me the position. So I just need the name, and I need the score, something like that. Yeah. So let me quickly create this array of players. And then whatever. Yeah. So now, guys, can you tell me, and it goes without saying, guys, that this is absolutely vital. Yeah, this is absolutely vital. So can you tell me how can I display the list of players? I want to essentially rebuild the same thing, but instead of hard coding each player, I want to display them out of that list. So can anybody tell me how to do that? Fantastic. Players.map makes sense to me. And then what else, Mickey? Mm-hmm. In his brackets, I got brackets, Ebrima. Yep. So, yep. So Ebrima said brackets, and then what? Yep. Let me open it so you can get a touch about the API. How do you get the position, guys, of the player? Ah, brilliant, Ian. That's correct. I love that. We need to add the index, right? So position equal index. Is that right? Okay. Let's leave it like that. Ah. Position index plus 1. Otherwise, what will be the first position? 0, correct. That feels a bit weird, right? Who is on position number 0? That's a bit weird. Yeah. That only works in Germany. Don't ask me why. I'm a big motorsport fan, and in Germany, some races they do that. Lap number 0. What the hell that means? Yeah. Anyway, Germans. Okay, so position 1, and then what else? Right. Anyone apart from Minji, guys? I know Minji knows the answer. So anyone apart from Minji? Can anyone apart from Minji continue that, please? That's correct. That's correct. That's the first thing, right? Player.name. And then what else? Score equal player.score, right? All right, all right. So that's very long, right? So let's refactor it a bit. Let's keep one attribute, one prop per line. So that's a bit easier to read. So will this work, guys? Yes? Are you sure? What? Uh, that's that's correct, Ian. That's absolutely correct, Ian. So you see, guys, we're using curly braces. Yeah? Because we're using curly braces, that means we have to explicitly return something. Or, as Ian suggested, you can simply use parentheses, so then you don't have to return anything. That happens, that will be returned immediately. VS Code is complaining, no, not anymore. There was some delay. All right, and also someone was suggesting to use a key, right? Yes, remember, every time you use a map, you need a key. The key will help React to identify that particular player. So what should we use as a key? The index. That's fine. That's fine. Why? The key can be whatever you want. Whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. The only restriction is it should be something unique. The index is definitely something unique. However, React guidelines suggest you to use, if possible, something different than the index. There are some technical reasons under the hood I'm not going to explain. So, do we have any other unique attribute? The name, correct. We can assume the name of the player is unique. Yeah, at least regarding this exercise, definitely the name is unique. The score can be unique, but I hope you agree with me. Two players may got the same score. Yeah, however, the name can be considered unique. Cool. All right, so let's see if it works. So if I refresh, fantastic. I got my app running. So now back to what I believe Panos asked before. Can we style something based on the key? I don't think so because of different reasons. But anyway, let's just figure out, guys. Let's figure out. So I'm opening my DevTools, and then I will try to open my elements. You see, the key is not propagated. I don't have, guys, any property called key. I just got the class. So no, we cannot use the key, Panos. We cannot use the key. Anything else, guys? Any questions? That's all right. Thank you. Any question, guys? All right. So now the last part of this workshop is fantastic. I got my player component correctly created using grid. However, using flex. Now I want, as I told you before, to create a proper grid with two columns. So how do we do that? Well, we go to the CSS, and then here, well, first of all, we need a class on the root component, yes, starting grid. Let's do that. Starting grid. So now, if I refer to my starting grid element, I can do display grid. Do you remember, guys, how to create two columns? Excuse me. Correct. Grid, template, columns. What? If I go two columns, how we do that? That's correct, guys. 1FR, 1FR. Yeah. So, and then if we refresh, you see. So now we are effectively combining flex and grid. We got flex for each player, and we got grid to orchestrate the layout of players. How can we get some spacing between our players? Correct. Grid gap, for instance, 30 pixels. Yeah, something like that. And then, boom, you got some space. And that's the way it works. Now, guys, how can we, even though that's fine, I hope you agree with me, excuse me, how can we change the layout for mobile? Yeah, on mobile, I want to have a single column. How can we do that? Correct. We need to add a media query Brima. So media max with 600 pixels, for instance, and then here we can use starting grid, and now we can change the number of columns. Yeah, if the resolution is, or if the viewport is below 600 pixels, then keep a single column. Then you see that's mobile and that's desktop. Yeah, so that works fine. Next week, Panos will talk about SAS, which is some sort of way of creating CSS stuff a bit easier. So he probably will talk about media queries. I'm sure he will talk about how to create variables. So probably you notice on my starting grid player, I'm I'm repeating my variable twice. Yeah, you see, this is my light blue, and I got my light blue twice. So if I want to change from light blue to dark blue, I need to change it twice. So Panos will explain how to create a variable with CSS, with SAS to like JavaScript. In JavaScript, you create a variable and you can reuse it multiple times. So that's pretty much the same thing. Guys, that was pretty much it from my side. So do you have any questions? Hmm? Yep. Hmm? Yep, that's correct. I was expecting that question. That's right. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So, if you don't know what Adam is talking about, if I search starting grid again, you will see that for instance, the first. Let me find a good picture. I mean, for instance, oh God, sorry, this is so slow. So if you pay attention, you see that the columns are not perfectly aligned. Why? Because we want to give some advantage to the first rider. Yeah. So there is some sort of margin here. Yeah. Um, how can we do that with CSS? That's a good question. Actually, it's a really good question. Let me think about it. Personally, what I will do is I will apply some sort of margin top to the players that are on an even position. Yeah. So player number one, the position is odd. Player number two is even. Player number three is odd. Player number four is even. Yeah. I'm not convinced if that will work or not. First of all, with CSS, we can definitely change elements that are in, you see, in a even and odd rule. Yeah. So let's see if that makes sense. Yeah. So you see, let's pay attention to the syntax. So this is what we call a pseudo selector. We got an element, and we're going to find the child which is on a given index. So let's play around this idea. Let's play. I mean, I'm to be honest with you guys, I'm not convinced if that will work or not. I'm not convinced. But anyway, let's try the idea. So we'll see. Well, yeah, because I got some mental concerns about that approach. But anyway, I don't know. Guys. I don't know. I'm seriously don't know. So because I don't know, let's figure out. Yeah? If I want to access all the even elements, I hope it should look something like that. You see, I want to access the player, which is 2n. Hopefully that will attack the even elements. First of all, to see if my theory is correct, let me do something silly. Let me change the border. Yep. So let's see if my elements on the right hand side got a different border or not. Okay, cool. That's good. You see that the first step is correct. I'm attacking the right element. But now the problem is if I apply some sort of margin top, you see, because we are using grid, I mean, it somehow works. It somehow works. However, the consequence is making the boxes, these boxes, smaller. Yeah, that was my concern. That was my concern. It's not that simple, guys. It's not that simple. Hopefully, using grid, we could, I don't know, we could play with alignment and things like that. So you have, okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. What? Yeah, it becomes more complicated. There are multiple ways of dealing with the problem. So, for instance, what you can do is on the odd ones, apply the margin itself on top to the bottom. I don't know. This is just some sort of trick, and you see, then it works fine. You notice what I did, right? I did some sort of trick. So on the elements on the left hand side, I apply a margin on the bottom. On the elements on the right hand side, I apply the margin on top. So visually speaking, then you get that sort of gap. I believe, and this is just finger in the air, this is a gut feeling, that with grid we can do that. There is a way to apply a gap to the elements on the right hand side. So grid gap only on certain columns, maybe only on odd columns or even columns. I don't know, guys. To be honest, I don't. At the moment, I'm completely lost. So I don't know if that's even possible. Grid gap. Yeah, that may require some sort of research afterwards. Yeah, I don't want to waste your time now. But even if grid doesn't support that naturally, you see there are definitely ways with CSS to attack a given column type. So on the first example, I got a pseudo selector to attack all the odd columns. In other words, the columns on the left. On the right hand side, I got another style to change the margin top to bottom, something like that. Yeah. Technically speaking, this is arguable, but from a user point of view, it definitely works. No, not with grid, not with grid. Well, not as far as I know, because in reality, guys, the columns are fluid. If you look at the CSS, Adam, I don't have two columns. I have 6 elements. So it's up to grid to decide how are these columns going to be arranged. Once again, I don't know if there is a way using grid to tell, all right, grid, you decide the columns. Fantastic. Please apply that gutter, that gap to a given column. Only on a column. I don't know. Column. Okay, maybe column gap. I don't know if that's even possible, guys. I'm 75% sure we can do that, but yeah, once again, that requires some research. If you find it out, please let me know. Anything else, guys? Cool. I'm going to share these snippets on Slack if you find them useful. Apart from that, as usual, let's do a 5 minutes break and let's catch up later about the forking repos with Git. Thank you for watching, guys.